Welcome to this very short overview of effective professional learning. In this session, you will be learning about how to deal with that big frustration of delivering professional development in your organization, in your school, and then finding after a few months or a few weeks later that nothing that was so enthusiastically received during the session have been translated into practice. So despite all the effort, all the excitement that was generated during your course, when you look at the work of that individual, you see absolutely nothing has happened in his or her practice. So what goes wrong? What is the problem? And that is what we will be addressing in this short session. Now, where do I get this information from? Where has it, what have I based this on? Well, first and foremost, I've been a trainer, a principal, company CEO, and an advisor to governments and various different projects. And over all these years, I have found that the big problem lies not in the training, but the fact that there is no real structured follow-up or a program that ensures that the new learning gets moved from the training room or from the course online that the person attended or whatever professional development they participated in into practice. And there are a few things that, or building blocks or elements that are really essential for you to have in place to ensure that that investment really turns into real change of practice. It has real impact, real measurable impact in not only in the organization, but in the results that come from that investment. So whether that is improved student achievement, whether that is higher productivity, whether that's improved innovation, relations, client satisfaction, doesn't matter what the topic is or what the area is, you have to ensure that these building blocks are in place. And there are a few also very well-known and very well-accepted models that one should also consider in this process. The one that we will be talking about is the gradual release of responsibility. We will also talk about growth mindset in your organization, and I will explain to you an adapted model that I have used all my experience over the years of transforming learning into effective practice that contains 6 elements or 6 building blocks or 6 steps, doesn't matter what you want to call it, that will help you put this in practice. So before we start, I would like you to just take a piece of paper and write down what you would like to get out of the schools and what the problems are that you are experiencing in your particular environment. So take a minute, switch off the video, and just write it down, because by writing things down, it helps us to clarify our thoughts, and it also helps us to come back to this at the end of the learning to see whether you have perhaps found some answers or a way forward that could help you address this problem or these problems that you might be experiencing. Right, so I hope that you have written this down. I hope that you have that next to you as a visual reminder of why you are taking this time or why you're investing valuable time to listen to me in this short presentation. Now, not only have I looked at the Yendel, Hoppe, and Dana model, which I found to be absolutely brilliant, where they talked about professional development within the 4 walls of the school. And I found that to be relevant not only to schools, but to any professional organization, company, whether it's a university, whether it's a foundation, whether it's a commercial institution. I think all these principles make a lot of sense and are really applicable in different contexts. But I've also used all the experience that I've gained over years. You know, I've also had those highs and that excitement where you have really interactive professional development sessions and people are so enthusiastic and the queues are long wanting to talk to you afterwards, and then the disappointment that comes when you come back to do an impact study a few months later and to see that that translation into practice hadn't happened. And as a result of that, for me, once-off professional development sessions, it's not something that I really believe in, because you need a whole ecosystem and a whole system that is deliberately planned and structured and put into your annual action plans and your performance management policies to ensure that this really happens. Now, research shows, and there's a lot of research that has been done in this field, but what are activities that have the most impact on classroom practice? And again, I want to say I'm using the word classroom, but I think it is a much more broader field of applicability here. But when we can learn with other people, whether it's in a school and you can learn with teachers in your school or teachers from other schools, you have that ability to discuss, to share. And, you know, as Stephen Covey would also talked about the synergy that comes from people coming together and sharing their thoughts. So when people come together and they learn from each other, there is a much bigger social experience. And as human beings, we know that we are wired for social interaction. No wonder organizations like Facebook or Instagram, or where people want to reach out and get feedback and likes and comments from other people, we learn better in a social environment. And at the same time, by learning socially, it takes away the stress that comes from learning with somebody in a higher authority in your organization. You feel freer to also attach more meaning to it, because if you talk to like-minded people, if you can explain, you can teach others, you can have those meaningful learning conversations, you connect it with your own experiences in that you have in your brain, and therefore it just makes so much more sense. It's easier to remember, and it really becomes more integrated into your own knowledge system. And it also helps a lot if you can observe others teaching or using that strategy and then having a discussion with it. Because sometimes we have that feeling, or you often encounter this in your training, where somebody would say, oh, well, it works well for you, but it will never work well in my context. So it is really good if you can see somebody in your own organization, in your own school, doing it, modeling the strategy, and then you could really, it changes your belief systems. It's also very important to be part of a mentoring and coaching program, so that there is deliberate feedback, deliberate discussions around targets, around what's working, what's not working, and for you to, and the more immediate that feedback is, the better, but we will talk about that a bit later. It's also really important to have a really structured and collaborative inquiry into problems that the school or the organization is following. And I deliberately use the word structured, focused. So picking specific problems and then really delving really deep into the issues, the reasons, the root causes, and finding or trying to find collaborative solutions for it really is very powerful. And lastly, of course, you know, your training should be focused, highly focused and highly skilled training that is provided to the people that need it. So, and then of course, there also needs to be support, because sometimes we find that in an organization, in a school, people are sent to attend specific professional development courses. They send them to conferences, you go and you attend workshops, but there is no support to bring that back into the organization. Either you're not given enough time or opportunity to work with your colleagues to transfer that knowledge, or you will find that people in management do not necessarily understand what it is that you're trying to do, because they sent somebody and it's not part of the strategic planning in the organization. So you could find yourself alone trying to make a change, but not really having the support or the necessary materials to do that. So these are identified areas, and it therefore resonates quite well with the Yendel, Hoppe, and Dana model, where they looked at building blocks that need to be in place for effective professional development and change to happen in the school. Now, I want to hone in on one particular area, and that is the learning needs of adults. It's not just for adults, it's for younger people as well. You know, we all have very specific learning needs, but they identified 5 key learning needs for adults, adult learning. And I took those learning needs and I modified it slightly, because I felt we need to add a 6th element. But it's really worthwhile reading the Yendel, Hoppe, and Dana book, where they shared this result, where they discuss all of these areas: the source of knowledge, type of knowledge, orientation, and the learning needs as in totality, and what happens in the organization if any one of these elements are not fully understood or not present. So you will see that I've adapted this model slightly. I've added a first step, which is so often overlooked, and that is identifying the needs of the organization, the school, the students, the teachers, the staff members, team members in a particular organization, your middle leaders, your senior leadership teams. And that can only happen through a really extensive data finding and data analysis process, where you take into account different kinds of data, triangulating that data, and to really find out what is the need of individuals, of teams, departments, and also the organization as a whole, especially taking into consideration the organizational goals, vision, the direction that you are going in, the strategic plan that you are going in. For example, I might have an individual who is in need of a particular skill, or expresses in a feedback form that they would like to have a particular professional development, access to professional development in a particular area. Now, when evaluating the direction of the company, that might not seem or might not be coherent with where you are going as an organization. So that's where you have to look at your policies. You know, what is the scope? Do you give people, individuals like that, access to training or development that is not really aligned with or necessary for the development of or achievement of your ultimate goals? But at the same time, we have to have a clear structure in terms of what the expectations are for individuals. What skills do you expect them to have? And also, one needs to look at the data. You know, what is the performance of students if they are teachers? You need to look at an analysis of their work. You need to consider doing 360 evaluations, getting feedback from different stakeholders, surveys, interviews, looking at their own self-assessment and own needs analysis. And therefore, it's a very important task, because my experience has shown me that So often, when I'm asked by a company or a school or a owner of a serious number of schools or government agency to come and present some professional development around a particular topic, you would find that a lot of people disengage because the company, the boss, whoever it was, decided everybody needs this particular training. But then you might have individuals in that training room who are actually quite skilled in that area, or to whom that particular topic is not relevant. So it is so important that you look at identifying what the organizational gaps are. So maybe it's a new system you're bringing in, maybe in school it's a new curriculum, it's online teaching and learning that came upon us because of the COVID pandemic that suddenly forced so many schools into using online blended learning models, which they were not used to. So, but again, it's really so important to be sure what the needs of the whole group, individuals, departments, and teams are, so that the kind of training that people receive really meet their needs. And also within that training, even if you are providing company-wide training, it's also important to identify where different people are in that process, so that in your training you could perhaps build in some differentiated activities where those who are more advanced could go on, work individually, work in smaller teams on more advanced aspects, or utilizing those people as coaches who could then become coaches in support of those people for whom the learning is very new. And once you have identified, it's really where you should be spending a lot of your time before you decide on what you're going to do, and also take it back to how that is going to help you meet your organizational targets or your school performance targets. Right, so after you now have identified what the needs of the staff are, so you have evaluated the individual progress against their performance targets, taking the performance management system, your policy, looking at individual targets, departmental targets, subject targets, and identifying who has exceeded, who has not achieved their targets. Also looking at observations. There's so many ways in which one could gather data and information around the performance of our staff members, observing them in practice, analyzing the data, whether it's student performance, as I said, or whether it in a school, it could be looking at an individual's performance, looking at a team's performance, looking at a year group or a particular subject. And in a company, it could be different departments, different products, people who work on specific areas in the company. So after you've looked at that data, and you have also gathered some further information to enrich or deepen your understanding through surveys, interviews, work analysis, and potentially doing 360 evaluations and self-assessments, you then put together a comprehensive professional development plan for the year. And it's so important to note that there is really no one-size-fits-all solution. We work with people, and people have different learning styles, they have different needs, they have different ways in which they learn best. So the more you know about the people, the more you have a chance of your professional development being successful and embedded in practice. So let us look at the next building block. And this is now that you've identified the learning needs of your staff, of your organization, you have to think about, okay, well, what am I going to give them? How are they going to learn this best? Who am I going to get to help and lead this professional development? And, the first thing I would say is it's good to look within your organization. Who are the champions of that particular skill? Because, it's so good if you could find champions who could lead small team training or maybe larger team training, because then people feel valued, they feel recognized, and they understand the needs within the context of the school, the subject, or the organization. And then, of course, identifying, as I have been saying over and over again, that it meets the needs of the individuals and it is aligned with the organizational goal and targets. Looking at the training itself, it should be engaging. It should give people an opportunity to interact, to give input, to share, to collaborate with others, and especially also time to process the learning. Now, what I find is within this era of the pandemic and everything being online, people feel really overwhelmed. In the past, that you had a chance to drive to your training session and you had a coffee break where people physically got up out of their chairs and discussed things around the coffee tables, meeting people, networking with people. And now it is just a continuous stream of meetings, training. There's no brain break. There's no time for that social interaction. So when you think about whether it's online training, whether it's face-to-face training, it is really important that these needs of humans, what the brain needs to learn best, is recognized. And I mention sharing, giving input, interacting, time to process and collaborate. And all of this is possible in an online environment, especially if you build in things like activities. Okay, stop the video, draw a mind map, collect this, make a list, go into breakout rooms using a lot of the online tools like Padlets and Mentimeter, and letting people share and discuss their own opinions. Create time for discussion. Now, you might say, well, people don't switch on their videos and it's really uncomfortable. And believe me, I've had that situation over and over again where you have a screen full of people attending your training, all the cameras are off, and you have these uncomfortable silences. Well, just take into consideration that these might be all new people who do not all have the courage or the ability to just, speak up in front of 100 people that they haven't met before. So think about how you could facilitate those opportunities for collaboration. Something that I find works really well is, for example, if you create groups with shared Google tools. So you could use your Google Slides. We love that. That really works well. One Google slide, 4 people have access to it. There's a graphic organizer to fill in. There's steps, there's roles. So people really engage, even if they don't necessarily talk, but they could see what others are doing and they could share. Another thing would be if you use a Padlet where you could record your own response, or you could record a response to somebody else or write a response to somebody else. That's also very meaningful. And don't forget the simple chat box on the side, asking people to just write a 1 or write a word or just respond. And then you can always go back to very simple things like, give them traffic light cards or even let people show a thumbs up or a thumbs down to indicate their understanding. So these are all things that you could consider to, and when you appoint somebody who does the training, ask them to share with you an example of a training session that they have delivered in the past, so that you could see, or you could ask them, what strategies do you follow to engage participants in the training? Because engagement is the key, right? Fully engaged, fully attentive, person who can make their learning visible is obviously a much better opportunity for people to be successful. Right. When people engage, when they learn socially, when they talk about their learning, when they have to explain things to others, it means that they have an opportunity to link the learning to new knowledge, or to existing knowledge, the new learning to existing knowledge that they have. When we talk about existing knowledge, it's important to think about what the brain needs to learn best. And apart from feeling safe in an environment where making mistakes are not seen as weaknesses, or is not punished or ridiculed, like we know some environments it does happen, it's also important to learn socially, because we have mirror neurons, we are wired for social learning. We need to be active in our learning, moving, writing, discussing, because, we learn with our entire body. At the same time, it's really important for us to attach the new learning to, or give meaning to the new learning. And that meaning happens when we can attach our own experience, or it can link to knowledge that we already have. And then lastly, of course, we need time for processing the new learning. We need time for reflection, for practice, and to see whether, to give our memory, or give us time to move that learning into the long-term memory. And the purpose of this is not to talk about how learning happens best in the brain. That's another session. But I thought it would be interesting to just mention it at this point. So what kind of learning can our staff have? And here it's important to know, learning is not always workshops. Learning could be workshops or CPD, continuous professional development sessions, whether that's for the whole school, whether that's regional, international, or only sessions done within a particular department. But at the same time, it's online learning courses, it's research articles that you could share, it's and then asking staff to discuss, or books, journals, and of course, very, very powerful is peer coaching, internal presentations, even things like doing action research. All of these are ways in which staff could develop their knowledge. Now, let's move on to the next building block, which is building block 3. Let me go back. I think I went back a little bit too fast. Sorry about that. There we go. Right. So the next building block that we have is looking at modeling, or seeing the learning in action. Now, why is this important? I've often found that people can relate to the theory within the example that I give them. Let me give you an example. I might, well, let's take something like a cooperative learning structure, where we give a very particular example about, it could be about history, or it could be about science, or a very specific topic that comes from the curriculum, and we let the teachers practice and let them do the activity related to that particular topic. But then when we ask them to go back home and to go back to their classroom or to their department and apply it in their own context, they really struggle to do that. And there are many reasons for it. I think one would be, people are afraid to take risks, especially if your environment is not safe and it doesn't encourage experimentation, or, seeing mistakes as learning opportunities. But also sometimes it's just difficult for people to translate an activity that was done on a history topic into a science topic. So that is why it is very important to identify those champions in the school who are really good at or really grasp the new learning, to model the implementation of this in their own classes. Now, in the training itself, you would already have some element of modeling. So you don't want a training session where the person like me is just talking all the time. You want the participants to actually do, participate, practice that particular skill that is that they've been taught. So that's the first layer. But then, they might still leave that room saying, well, it works for that person, or it works for that subject, or it works in that industry, but it won't work for me. So therefore, it's important to, as a second layer, to ensure that you have a strategy in place. You plan it. You must really plan the rollout of this new learning very carefully. So who is going to model this? Who can they observe doing, using, practically implementing the strategy in their own situation? And that's part of that localization of knowledge, which is so important. So if you have a training session, you should always ask the question, how can it be localized? How can it be adapted to meet the needs of my organization? And that is a very, very important question. When you see this being done in your own school or in your own department, with your own students, in your own language, then that's where often belief systems start changing. Belief systems won't change after a training session, I can assure you that. A teacher's belief system changes when they see the results of that activity or that strategy in real life. So if you see, you'd never believed it would work, but then you see the teacher using it in the classroom, you see the response of the students, and you might then think, there's something more to this, or I would like to learn how to do this. I've seen this over and over again. One example, I was in a school and I was in a grade 1 teacher's classroom demonstrating to her that the strategies that I did was applicable from grade 1 up to grade 12. And we did a cooperative learning strategy. And she was teaching the students Jolly Phonics. And she stood in front of the class and she made the movements, and then the students had to repeat it. And I said to her, okay, let's try and swing this around. Let's group up the students in pairs, or pair up the students. They will take turns. One will say the sound, the other one will do the movement. And she said to me, this can never work. These children are too small. They can't do it. And I said, just give me the opportunity to model it to you and demonstrate it to you. And when we did this and the kids just embraced it and they just did this independently, this teacher's mouth literally fell open. And that is the kind of aha moment that people often get when they see things, when they observe things happening, not in a video per se, but a video is also a method that you can use to make it more practical, because it's not always possible for people to go into somebody's class because of clashing timetables. So you could use videos, you could use samples of student work, you could make these samples and videos available online. And then, as I said, you can identify champions who would have this as a structured, planned, targeted approach to demonstrating and modeling to others. Now, we spoke earlier about the gradual release model of responsibility. Now, this is a model that I've used in all of the frameworks, the transformation frameworks I've developed, whether it's for the Emirates or Malaysia or South Africa. This is always at the heart of building sustainable practice. And it's something, again, that you need to think about when you're rolling out new training in your school or in your organization. So and you will see that this gradual release model actually also closely it's related to or correlates to this 6-phase model, 6-element model that I'm sharing with you. So we have on the one side the teacher or the trainer or whoever is the person responsible for the development. And on the other side, you have the student or the learner, whether it's a student in the classroom, whether it's a teacher, whether it is a person in your organization. And you then have this gradual release of responsibility. So, first, I will model the practice to you and you will observe it. I will do it and you will watch me do it. The second structured phase is the shared practice. So this is where I'm practicing my skills. I have to practice it. I've been given targets for practicing it, but I'm not necessarily doing it all alone because I might not yet have the confidence. So this is where we could have team teaching, where we do it together and we decide who's going to do what, and we work together on this. The third phase of this gradual release model, and you will see gradually on the left side that the teacher's responsibility is getting lesser and lesser, and then it's increasing on the side of the teacher, is guided practice. Now, guided practice is when you do it and I would be giving you feedback. I might guide you or I might coach you. We could agree that if I see something that needs intervention, I can give it to you afterwards. But that is also based on an agreement on how this would happen. And then lastly would be the independent practice, where all the responsibility or most of the responsibility is now released, and that the person does it independently, but there still is this element of reflection, whether it is I myself reflecting on how my lesson went, or after a block of lessons, analyzing the data to see whether the new approach made a difference for the students, or whether it is a conversation, a collaborative conversation between members of a professional learning community, where we are then discussing how is it going, what's working, what's not working. So this is the gradual release model that you will see is fed throughout what we do. And the other thing, when we get to this time to practice, the targets that are set for practicing, because that is the next building block, we have to give our staff time to practice. We need them to have time to take it all in, to practice, to embed this in their everyday experience. But we have to set a target, because we're human beings, right? If there's no target for you, by that time I would want you to have implemented this number of strategies, or I want to see this done X number of times, or I would like to see this happen in your classroom, then I'm sorry, but I don't think there are very few people who are so self-motivated. There are, but they are not in the majority. So it's always very good to set targets for when you would like to see this practice done. But at the same time, it's important that you give enough time, and this is where differentiated support comes in, because you might have people that just grasp it quickly, you know that they are open to change, they are quick to embed new strategies, and then you have those who take a bit longer. And this is where you could also work with them and then work on setting these SMART targets. Now, you might say, oh, SMART targets, we've seen it, we know what it is. Well, SMART targets, it should be embedded in your practice, because if your target is not specific, we want to improve reading in grade 4, or I would like to be a better teacher. What does that mean? What does better mean? How do you measure that? How do you achieve that? How do you feel a sense of satisfaction that you've actually achieved it if you don't give a very specific target? So SMART targets, and you should teach your staff to set SMART targets, because this cascades down into the classroom, because we expect them to teach the children to set SMART, or in an organization, staff members within a particular department to take the big target for the organization, break it down in smaller targets, or if it's an individual issue, an individual developmental skill or area for development, that they set SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound targets. I'm not going to go into this much deeper. There is a bit of an exercise a bit later, but I think one of the things that people really struggle with is attainable and relevant. Attainable means, yes, I can set a fantastic target. 80% of my staff will do this in 3 weeks' time. Is it really possible with the resources we have, with the skill sets we have, with the motivation levels we have, with the time we have? If you set a target, it should stretch people, but it shouldn't be impossible, because there's nothing as demotivating as setting a target that that they know will never be achieved, because then you won't even start. And the relevant one could be really thinking through whether, this teacher wants to do a course in a Photoshop course, and you have to ask yourself, okay, good, you do a Photoshop course, but why is this relevant towards achieving a higher outcome for a particular area in the chemistry curriculum? So it's very important to always bring that back to the bigger plan, the bigger goal, the outcome that needs to be achieved. So this is really important, and I want to just focus on point number 4. Make practice an expectation and not a voluntary action. Now, this might sound very draconian, very authoritarian, but I think that sometimes people, because they don't like change, because they're afraid of change, they will go and then they just will not do anything. We call it a state of learned helplessness. Oh, I don't know how to do it. I can't do it. I'll never be able to do it. But if you set high expectations of learning being the lead learner yourself and modeling this through what you are doing, but at the same time making it a clear expectation, if you are meeting the learning needs, if the targets are relevant, if it is really relevant for that person, you have the right to say, I expect of you to do it. And this is where many people step back from it. They don't want to pressurize people, but I think there's always a way in which this could be managed. So we've spoken about the 4th building block. The 5th building block is really essential, and I find that in so many organizations, this just doesn't happen. It stops at the target setting, if it gets that far. It's important to give people coaching. It's important to give people feedback. It's part of that gradual release model. It is where people can get authentic feedback in the moment, or as soon as, or as quickly possible after they've been observed, so that they feel that they could actually take action. It doesn't help to observe a teacher and then give them feedback 4 weeks later. That is of no use. It is just can then be seen as useless, threatening, or derail the whole development process. This is where peer coaching is so powerful. It's authentic, it's non-threatening, and both the coach and the coachee actually benefits from this process, because there's a skill involved in giving feedback and there's a skill in receiving feedback. And those professional conversations that really move both people forward in their practice. And sometimes the coach sees things that is also a learning experience for themselves. So, and there's enough research done. The Teaching and Learning Toolkit, the Sutton Teaching and Learning Toolkit, really identifies feedback as one of the most impactful actions that impacts on performance. So it's really important that this is part of the culture, that there's an open door policy, that practice is deprivatized, so that we feel that we're all working in a collaborative fashion towards achieving the targets of the company. And of course, inculcating this growth mindset that we spoke about before is so important, that people see mistakes as learning opportunities, that they believe they can be successful, that they don't feel threatened by the success of others, that you focus on this I can environment, not in a false way, because it doesn't help to just say, oh, you can do it, you can do it. It must be real, genuine. There must be a pathway for people that show them how they can improve and that they can succeed. But a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, you can imagine in an organization with a fixed mindset, a belief that change is not necessary. Well, look what happened to some big brands like Kodak, for example, or Nokia. What happened to them? They didn't believe the digital age was coming, and they didn't see change as being necessary. The last building block is the reflection. And really, this is the one that is most easily cut out or ignored or not implemented, whether it is in a classroom experience, whether it is in a departmental, whether it's in a company-wide experience. You have to build time and plan time for processing the information, reflecting on the impact, the change that it has made. And that there is this review cycle, because change is never stagnant. It's never, improvement never stops, right? So we always have to think about, okay, so gather the data, analyze the data, identify the areas for development, review the plan, change the plan if you see it's not working. You might embrace a new method, but, despite everything that you've done, you've seen it doesn't really make much of a difference. So then don't keep on, they say, don't flog a dead horse. Don't, change, find something else that works. And also give your staff members the opportunity to give their input and identify where they think things have gone wrong in the process, or what they feel should be done more of, what should be stopped, what should be further enhanced. And, be open to feedback, be open to acknowledging that sometimes some things don't work. So that's really important. Different modes of reflection could be through action research, data analysis in the professional learning communities, in peer conferences. So when you are planning the rollout of a new approach, new training, new development, do consider very closely these 6 building blocks of effective professional learning. Do you know what they are? Can you write them down? Quickly stop the video and see if you can remember what the 6 different building blocks are. Right. Did you get them? First, to find the problem, to define the problem, do the data analysis, find the information so that you are sure what is the need of your organization or your individuals. Then the second one, planning good, effective professional learning that is, provides choice, that's of a variety, that really meets the needs that you have identified. Then people need to see it modeled or demonstrated so that we could start changing their belief systems. Then they need to practice it, and they need to have targets to which they are working. Then, after they've been practicing it for a while, they might be doing it wrong. So you need that peer coaching, the feedback that needs to happen on the changed practices that are being implemented. And lastly, there is the need for reflection, taking a step back to see whether this is really has been successful in the organization. So there's some activities that you can do. I believe it will be good if you can do this in your team, in your professional learning community, or with a partner. reflect on these 6 steps and your organization's work or your school's process, your school's approach, and ask yourself, which of these steps do you follow in your organization? And you can write them down, or you can draw it out on a large piece of paper, use some sticky notes. The more you can engage people, the better. The second thing now from this and what we said today, or from this process, is there one thing? And don't do 6, just pick one thing that you believe that would improve that you could improve in your school or in your organization to improve staff learning. Is there one aspect that you feel you could do better, or that you could focus on when you have your next staff training? And then once you've identified this, my challenge to you is writing a SMART target around this one thing that you have identified. So take some time with your colleagues, take a break, switch off the video, and write that SMART target. Okay, so let's do the SMART test. If I assume you have now written down your SMART target, you've discussed this with your friends. So, think about it, go through these 4 phases. How specific is your target? Can you make it even more specific? Maybe instead of saying, I would like to improve reading in grade 4 or geometry in grade 9 or form 3, what aspect of it do you want to improve? Is there a particular area that students are struggling with? Is it a particular teacher's skill that you feel needs improvement? So the more specific you are, the more you have a chance of achieving that result. Secondly is, do you have tools? Do you have a checklist? Do you have how are you going to measure the achievement of this goal? Is it really measurable? What does I want to have more engagement look like? You can't measure that. What does more mean? What does better mean? What does improved mean? So define those vague terms in terms of measurable results. Once a week, 2 every 3 days, X percentage increase or improvement, specific numbers. And usually you would have this with a number, or with every Monday or 3 Mondays. So see, can I measure this? Can I tick this off to say, yes, this really has happened? Reflect on yourself or your team. Think, do you have the time, the support, the buy-in in order to achieve this goal? Can I say 100% of my staff? Can I say there'll be a 50% improvement? Because you should have a stretch target, but you shouldn't have an impossible target, because once people have failed at that, or they look at this and they think it's just, what, is she crazy? How on earth? So you have to be very, very clear that it's a stretch target, but it absolutely is attainable, because you've got all of those factors, all of those support measures in place. Then a really important one, I think, is what will the impact be when you achieve this goal? And how does that fit in with a bigger picture? Okay, so everybody on our staff can now use Adobe Illustrator. So how is that going to help achieve a higher literacy rate for literacy, or better literacy skills amongst our students? Or I've seen in some organizations, they focus on an improved bathroom facilities, or shades for the car park. Yes, it's there, it's achievable, and it's specific, and it's measurable. Yes, we've built a carport, but how does that help the organization achieve its goals? So always to bring it back to, so if we've achieved this, what will the change be? And lastly, You have an action plan. An action plan means, who will do it, what will they do, and very importantly, by when will they do it. You need to define very clearly by when you would like this action to end. By when would you like to see this achievement? Else, you can't measure it because you will not know when to measure it. So, all 5 of these things have to be in place. So look at your SMART target and see, can you go back? Can you improve it? Can you practice writing targets? Because you also need to share this skill with your teachers, with the students you're teaching, with your staff members. And that brings us to basically the end of the session, where you can really now assess yourself to see whether you have achieved the objectives of this session. Now, to say I fully achieved it means I can teach others. That's always the test, right? Can you teach your grandmother? Can you explain this to your grandmother? That to me is always the litmus test. If I can explain it in a way that somebody, who doesn't know anything about it can understand it, that to me is an important one. I can teach others. Partially, I understand it mostly, but there still are some areas that need clarification or better understanding. And not yet, I need quite a bit of further. I'm still very vague about that area. And be honest with yourself, because this is where that culture of reflection and honesty and growth comes in, because it's no use saying that you know something, but you can't really, you're not fully able to explain it to somebody else. These are all activities that you could do in your department, as a school or as an individual. And I hope that you enjoyed this session. And if you want to learn more, please come back to me. I will be sharing a lot of training sessions that are interactive, that you can do by yourself, and you can also do within your team or within your department. So thank you very much for joining me in today's class. If you like this training, please like the video and subscribe to the channel as well.